one of the criteria you have for deciding what stage you're in is the number of companies that are in this sense.
Yes.
So often early companies are often tend to be in stealth mode, so it's hard to find out about them, how many there are. So what kind of criteria do you use to track that down?
Oh, it's actually, nothing is really stealth. Like in practice, like you guys are, especially in the science and tough engineering world, you know who your colleagues are. There isn't like some secret university that no one's ever heard of that is doing work that is 10 times better than anybody else. It's like you basically know, okay, the 5 universities in the world that do good work at this are blah. And if it's going to, you know, if anything is going to come out, it's going to come from one of these 5 groups or people that have worked at them. That's it. So like, and typically word gets around if one of them starts a company. Like, it's actually pretty easy to go spider route. Like, stealth means nothing. Stealth only means something if you're doing boring ass stuff. Like, if you're making like, because people are like, oh, I'm in stealth, I'm making like a new mobile game. And you're like, oh, well, whatever. Right? It's like, then you can be in stealth because nobody even cares to look for your thing. Okay, yes, in the back.
So for scientists and academics who are going into this for the first time, what do you see as their steepest learning curve as they're going into commercializing?
Whew. Yeah, entrepreneurship is like unusually not like science at all. It's like I think if you have a scientific mind, you want to go put everything, you want to characterize everything by like, you know, dependable rules and all that sort of thing. And entrepreneurship is a little bit of an art form, and there's a lot of style to it. And there's an element of like, you know, charisma and presence and all these sorts of things that I think when you see that in an entrepreneur, you're like, oh, they got it. But like trying to go explain to a scientist, it's like, well, here, you need this much more charisma. And it's like, oh, this doesn't do anything. So I don't even try to explain that part. It's like, okay, well, I mean, if they have it, then I'm like, okay, let's go coach this through a little bit. But if they don't have it, that's not worth explaining. You should just say like, well, you should just say that like, hey, when it comes to the fundraising cycle, then you might want to go pair up with somebody who's better explaining things in the market. And it's fine to go do that. It's fine. Like a lot of just business success, period, has to do with successful team formation. So it's fine that a person doesn't have all the skills.
So you lumped all the grants in one category, and I was curious if you had any thoughts on, you know, within that subset, if, you know, they also have different expectations of, you know, the impact that they have, the short term versus long term, and maybe this sort of systematic thinking you apply can be used there.
Yeah, I mean, you can zoom into even the very early part and blow that out even more. And there are definitely, you know, foundations and organizations where it's like, hey, every year we just give, you know, X amount of dollars to things that are broadly in this category of things. This is our grant making approach. And others which are very much like, oh, here are all these criteria that you need to hit and like get it all into your application. Now, some of this has to do with, so that's the amount of friction that they are putting between you and the capital. And like you want to go calculate how you use your time relative to that. On one hand, the lower friction stuff just sounds better because maybe I can get that capital for lower friction. But on the other hand, sometimes if the friction matches the thesis of the type of work that you're doing, your percentage likelihood of getting it, and also the percentage likelihood that, you know, people would even apply to that. So like you are in a smaller field, like your odds might go up pretty significantly. So there's like a whole like strategy around grants as well. Like broadly speaking, you are looking though for sources of non-dilutive funding, because during like the very early stage, like even pre-early emergent, then like their venture capital is like fully not appropriate because venture capital creates a timeline. Yes.
So do you have any strong feelings one way or the other about SBIRs versus other research grants?
Yeah, so I did some work with the NSF SBIR program, and overall I like the structure of it. I mean, there is some overhead that they put in there, but they also don't put crazy restrictions on how the capital is used, and they don't put crazy reporting requirements. There is a thing to go think about in terms of like the folks that are granting grants, and then they want to go track all these impact metrics from you. Because like early on, you can't actually even know how to characterize what sort of impact you're going to have. So you might fully sign up for like a grant thing where you're going to fail all its impact metrics, and it creates a type of tax on your business going on. You know, it's like, oh, well, we need to spend 20% of our energy being able to go produce these things to go communicate with our grant giver. This is highly problematic. So that's a thing I would look out for in terms of the practical overhead. Now, if the type of reporting they're asking for is exactly the stuff you wanted to measure anyhow, and it's like not truly a tax because you're going to have 2 people on your team do that anyhow, then great. Maybe you are uniquely suited for that grant. Yes?
Yeah. So just a comment, which is, I just want to say, the soft stuff, the judgment stuff you're talking about, like the importance of people and business failure because of people, right on. You are so right. Can't stress that enough. Let me ask you a question which is kind of wraps off of this one, which is, for this group in particular, hardcore hardware and nanotechnology faces some unique funding challenges, like the GAO defines the manufacturing valley of death for fundraising for scale-up of non-VC participation. Do you have any insights that could address that? It's a different gig than like the apps or rideshares.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, the reason I give this presentation is I work in territories that are generally hard to get capital into, because I work on hardware and environment and a bunch of things where it's like, oh, that sounds really tough. That's not like 2 people in Amazon Web Services. That's like, you need to build a lab, and this lab needs to go execute this, and you need to hit these tolerances, and then it needs to be manufacturable, and then you need to go invest in tooling that would allow it to get to this sort of thing before you even realize any ongoing revenue. Or you need to put it out in the ecosystem, and the ecosystem responds in unpredictable ways. So understandably, it's hard to get capital to a bunch of things that I invest in. What I'll say is that there is a subset of the investment community that can understand what you are doing. And there's broadly, there's dumb money and smart money. So like smart money are people that actually understand what you're doing and can be actively helpful. And then dumb money is like people where they're in a condition that I call having more money than sense. And like, it sounds funny, but everybody is always in a condition of having more money than sense or more sense than money. And like, whichever one you are, you kind of need the other person. And even if you're a really smart person, like Bill Gates is actually a pretty smart person. But like, once he had like $100 billion, it's like, you have more money than sense, Bill, for sure. You got more money than sense. And as smart as you are, like that's too much money for one person to actually allocate it well. So what you want to do is, if you are a person that has more sense than money, and most people that do really hard technical work have more sense than money, you want to go find the people that are still smart money but have more money than sense, right? Like, I've done a bunch of work with like, Eric Schmidt related stuff, because that's actually a truly brilliant person. But once again, once you get into the billions of dollars, it's like you have more money than sense. So as brilliant as he is, it's like, great, he wants to have like the 10-minute interaction with you, get the general sensibility that you know what you're doing. And he's like, great, well, I got a lot of money and you have a lot of sense, so here we go. Now there is like a much smaller network. It's going to be like 0.1% of the overall network of early stage capital that can correctly route things that have a lot more sense than money. And you've got to kind of go discover the nodes in that network that are unique to, who is an investor who does seem to understand this atomic precision stuff that has moved more than $10 million of capital in the last couple years. Okay, great. How do I meet that person and the people in that person's network? Because they'll tend to know other people. This is a world where it's like the number of names to know is like maybe 24. And a person that is actually actively in it will know a couple of those 24, and then you spider those, and you'll hit as many as people are doing this type of investment in the world at this point in time. Let's get Alice in the back. Oh, prototype thinking, yes. I teach a course called Prototype Thinking, and it's about how to go rapidly prototype and iterate your ideas toward success in the market in the shortest amount of time. That's the thing I'm actually about to hold office hours for. Okay.
What do you feel about crowdfunding? And is there a particular one that you like?
Crowdfunding is a total mixed bag, because there is an adverse selection issue where a number of people that can't get capital in other ways do it through a crowdfunding mechanism. And there's about a half a dozen teams that have approached me after they successfully did their Kickstarter on some hardware, and they told me what they promised, and I told them, you're out of business, right? Because for better or worse, successfully doing a hardware product, even a relatively simple one, is tremendously about cash flow management. And just hearing how much money they got in, at what margins, and how the cash would need to flow during that time period, there's a huge unfinanceable gulf in what they've already promised. So that's not a thing that a person who can just log onto a website and put up a campaign and be like, the dollars are coming in, is really thinking about. And sometimes they can absolutely, and this is why so many hardware Kickstarters never end up existing. They raise the money and then the product is never delivered, because most of them do not know a bunch of the basics about how to go construct the financial operations of that business. And they will absolutely run out of cash. They just don't know that they are dead plus 7 months, right? That's how much time, I'll hear their numbers, I'm like, oh, you're dead in 7 months. What does that mean? And I'll run them through the numbers, and they're like, I'm dead in 7 months. And it's like, yes. Now, if you could go back to your people and write a thing and change the terms of the offer, then maybe you can be dead in 11 months, and then we'll take it from there, right?
Address equity crowdfunding now, like Reg CF.
See,
CF, there's equity.
So there's equity crowdfunding, and then there's just open-ended crowdfunding. So equity crowdfunding, if you have a number of accredited investors in there, it is better. But then something like AngelList, you are coming in for equity. It's kind of like crowdfunding-ish, but you still would want to have a syndicate lead or somebody that is pretty skilled on the investment side to make sure that the terms of what's being put together can actually work for you. Otherwise, it could completely blow up what's going on. Yeah.
Do you have an opinion about PitchBook as a means to find those investors that you talked about that have some sense and ability to fund hardware startups?
So I would just, however you find your first set of names is totally fine. But the way to evaluate is just ask people, well, what hardware or what difficult science or engineering have you invested in the last 5 years? What were the amounts that you came in for? How keen are you on doing more of that?
Yeah, but you have to identify them to ask them that question. I'm curious if you think PitchBook is one way to get there.
Yeah, the amazing thing about the modern world is no matter where you start, you can typically find the person within 2 or 3 bounces. So if you just reach out to somebody on PitchBook who is an investor and they just seem to be active, period, and you let them know, oh, I do this really difficult kind of hardware, they'll go through their Rolodex, and you're not a jerk on the call, then they'll go through their Rolodex and be like, oh yeah, who do I know that does, difficult stuff or puts in more than 5 million in hardware, da-da-da. And they'll be like, oh, well, you might talk to this person. And then whatever, in 2 or 3 bounces, you'll get to somebody interesting. That said, is that the exact fit? They may not be the fit for the stage that you're at or the allocation that you want or what have you, but at least you're kind of in the territory, and then you can kind of move it on from there. Okay, we got room for maybe one more question, unless there's 0 more questions, which is also fine.
Did you want to comment on down round, what that means?
Oh, a down round is your valuation ends up being lower in a subsequent round than the previous round, and it means that those people get a much more aggressive share for the money. But sometimes you need to take a down round because otherwise you just run out of cash. And you generally want to avoid down rounds, especially for hard sciences and engineering. If you're not in a situation where you need to capitalize hot, I would recommend to stay as cool as possible, which actually leaves your valuation lower. A lot of people try to do premature valuation optimization to get a really high valuation early. That can set you up to, for sure, get a down round or for sure fail. Yes?
Is that total market cap you're showing on these charts?
Yeah, this is a schematic about just amount of stuff happening in an industry and total amount of capital and impact on society in all forms. So there's horse-drawn carriages, and then there was a bunch of them, and then there's none, right? And there was for consumer drones, 15 years ago there's very few, and then there was literally 100 consumer drone companies, and now there's just Parrot and DJI. So now we're at the maturity phase, but we're not in the collapse phase for consumer drones. So every industry is somewhere on this chart. Yeah.
Okay, sometimes there's dips along the way too.
There's apparent dips, but like you scoot back from it and you're like, yeah, like society wanted a bunch of this for this time period. And then eventually we're like, we're over that now. Flip phones, we're over it now. So, and actually there's a fold phone now, but I think we're over it. Okay, that's it.
I think you have to make your office
Yes,
hours.
I got
Thank you. Thank you so much.
If you want to look at my course, it's just prototypethinking.com. And then the next cycle doesn't start until July though. Okay,